The CIA spent millions on an operation to salvage a sunken Soviet submarine and never realized the Soviets had already won. In the summer of 1968, a Soviet K-129 ballistic missile submarine sank in the Pacific Ocean. No one in Moscow announced it. No one in Washington knew for certain what had happened. But what followed was one of the most audacious intelligence operations in Cold War history, and a masterclass in how the GRU, Soviet military intelligence, turned American ambition into a weapon against itself. The K-129 went down roughly 600 miles northwest of Hawaii. It carried nuclear-armed missiles. It held cryptographic materials. It was a prize beyond measure. For the CIA, it represented an opportunity to peek inside Soviet technology, to recover codes, to understand the enemy's capabilities at the height of the Cold War. By 1970, the agency had developed a cover story. They created a fake mining company called Global Marine Development. The front was simple. They were going to salvage manganese nodules from the ocean floor, but the real mission was codenamed Azorian. The goal was to raise the K-129 from the depths. The operation was staggering in scope. They built a specialized ship called the Glomar Explorer. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars, an astronomical sum in that era. The CIA recruited billionaire businessman Howard Hughes as a public face. Everyone believed Hughes was funding deep-sea mining. Almost no one knew the truth. But here's where the story pivots. The GRU wasn't fooled. Soviet intelligence had tracked the K-129 loss from the beginning. They knew Americans would eventually come looking, and they were waiting. The Glomar Explorer set sail in 1974. The ship arrived at the wreck site with advanced retrieval systems. They lowered a massive mechanical claw, a pipe string designed to grip the submarine and haul it up from 16,500 feet below. Everything was rigged, calculated, engineered to perfection. And they did it. They recovered a section of the K-129. They obtained materials, documents, and hardware. From an operational standpoint, Azorian was a success. The CIA had done the impossible. They'd reached into the ocean and pulled up Soviet secrets. But the GRU's real victory came later. In 1975, journalist Seymour Hersh broke the story in the New York Times. Azorian was exposed. The world learned what the CIA had done, and the Soviets learned something crucial. The Americans had confirmed they could access the wreck. This is where the GRU's deception became clear. They had deliberately allowed the operation to proceed. They had monitored it closely. They had let American intelligence invest hundreds of millions of dollars and enormous effort, and then watched as that effort was publicly exposed, humiliating the CIA and damaging American credibility. More than that, the GRU had fed disinformation into the operation. They had seeded false intelligence about what was actually on the K-129. They had guided American expectations. And when the CIA finally raised the submarine, they found what the Soviets had led them to believe they'd find. The Glomar response, the phrase itself, became the GRU's inside joke. When asked about sensitive matters, Soviet officials would say they could neither confirm nor deny, mimicking the CIA's own language from the operation. It was a subtle, devastating insult. What made this deception so effective was its simplicity. The GRU didn't need to stop Azorian. They didn't need to confront it. They just needed to let it happen, observe it, and ensure that when it ended, the CIA would be left holding a hollow victory. The submarine that was raised contained materials of genuine intelligence value, but the Soviets had already removed or replaced the most sensitive items. They had prepared the wreck like a stage set. American intelligence walked through it, collected what they found, and never fully understood how completely they'd been managed. Decades later, defectors and declassified documents would reveal the full scope of the GRU's operation. They had known, they had watched, they had calculated the exact value of letting the Americans spend their resources, time, and credibility on an operation the Soviets had already accounted for. It's a masterclass in intelligence tradecraft. Not all victories are loud. Sometimes the most effective operation is the one your enemy thinks they won. The GRU understood that. They understood that America's greatest weakness wasn't its lack of capability, it was its need to believe in its own success. The Glomar explorer remained in service for years. Howard Hughes' involvement faded from public memory. The CIA eventually declassified much of the operation, but the core truth remained. The GRU had turned American ambition into a mirror, forcing the agency to see only what the Soviets wanted them to see. This is the story the intelligence world still teaches. It's a reminder that in espionage, the operation you think you're winning might be the operation you've already lost. The GRU proved that sometimes the best way to defeat your enemy is to let them believe they've defeated you. The K-129 sits at the bottom of the Pacific still. Some of it was razed, some of it remains, and somewhere in declassified archives, the GRU's files on Azorian probably contain a note about how perfectly the operation unfolded, not the American operation, but their own. Subscribe for more Cold War operations that rewrote the rules of intelligence, stories where the winner isn't always the one who strikes first.